Day 1 of considering religious claims until I come to a truthful conclusion. Today's claim, the Christian resurrection of Jesus Christ. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the core evidence claim behind Christianity. Christians point to the gospel narrative of Jesus Christ to conclude that he was a deity who performed miracles and also rose from the dead. This account claims that many people saw Jesus after his death and that he ascended into heaven, promising to return one day. But let's look objectively if these are claims that are trustworthy enough to be worth believing. To prove the historiography of an event, we must see if there are multiple independent sources. This means seeing if there are different sources that do not copy each other that report the same event. We do not have this for the resurrection. We must consider the date of which an event was reported. For example, a report written within a couple years of an event is substantially more trustworthy than a report written decades after an event. Scholars have found these questionable time gaps within the gospel narrative as well as other religious claims such as Muhammad's miracles and Apollonius the miracle worker. Historians then address eyewitnesses. The Bible claims that 500 people saw Jesus after his death as well as all of his followers. However, we don't get to hear about what any of these folks have to say. None of these folks ever provided any testimony about what they saw, and we only hear a claim about these eyewitnesses existing from one unsubstantiated source. I find this highly unusual. If somebody told you that a man rose from the dead and that 500 people saw it, but we couldn't find what any of these 500 people had to say and they left no trace, would that therefore make the 500 eyewitnesses a historical fact? No. We must then look for historical corroboration. What archaeological, governmental, historic, or written record do we have to suggest that supernatural events took place? We know Pontius Pilate was a real man based off of the archaeological discovery of Pontius Pilate's name found on a Roman inscription. Conversely, there have been no archaeological findings to suggest that Jesus supernaturally rose from the dead, such as an empty tomb. There is no independent record of Jesus doing anything supernatural, only record of Jesus being executed decades after his death. We then need to look at the reliability of the sources that do exist. Unfortunately, we do not have the original Gospels or the original sources for the Gospels that were anonymously written decades after Jesus' death in a different language from which he spoke. Not one historian or writer or eyewitness during Jesus' time bothered to say anything about the public and astonishing miracles that Jesus was performing. The authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not even historically attributed to the Gospels until nearly a century after they were written. Church fathers like Augustine, Pliny the Younger, Eusebius, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Josephus, and Tacitus do not provide any independent verification for the Gospels and do nothing to make the supernatural claims more legitimate. All they do is affirm the execution of Jesus Christ and provide testimony for early martyrdom. But even then, many scholars have disputed the extent of which these church fathers have exaggerated martyrdom claims. Not one martyr was verifiably an eyewitness to the execution of Jesus Christ. There are martyrs in other religions as well, so dying for a belief does not prove any supernatural claims, but rather sincerity of belief. Next, we should establish possible explanations. Christians deem the supernatural resurrection of Jesus Christ as the most rational explanation. But after considering the evidence, it's clear that there's a plethora of natural reasons to explain why so many people would believe that a man rose from the dead. First of all, to believe the Christian explanation, you're not just agreeing that a man rose from the dead. You're also agreeing that Jesus is an omnipotent and omnibenevolent child-murdering Jewish God who thought that producing an unsubstantiated narrative about sacrificing himself would be the best way to save humanity from an eternal hellfire he created, and that there was no other possible way that this God of perfect omnipotence could have enacted his salvation plan without first condoning in slavery for thousands of years. Conversely, there are many natural explanations for these religious claims. Throughout history, many people have claimed to speak with God and have used the devotion they've garnered from these claims to benefit themselves. Many people like Moses, Joseph Smith, Muhammad, Jim Jones, and David Koresh have claimed to speak with God and have garnered support and benefits from doing so. This is where religion begins, and there are absurd and immoral extents that people will go to on behalf of an unsubstantiated claim, which in turn produces religious hypocrisy. Why isn't it possible that Jesus was just a man who was concerned about truth who went against religious hypocrisy in religious theology until they killed him and lied about him and confused him within their own religions to prevent others from following in his footsteps? Or why is the prospect of a grave robber so outlandish whenever historically people have desecrated the corpses and tombs of people they disliked? That's assuming there was even an empty tomb to begin with, because again, the narrative about Jesus Christ is completely unsubstantiated. And supernatural hoaxes are extremely common, so I don't know why people are so quick to trust organizations like the church when they're still performing supernatural hoaxes to this day. Well, if the gospel is the only evidence that we have for the resurrection, is it at least consistent? The nativity of Jesus' birth presents an inconsistency across the four accounts. Herod the Great died in 4 BCE. The Gospel of Matthew places Jesus' birth during the reign of Herod. The Gospel of Luke, however, says that Jesus was born during a census under Quirinius. This well-attested census conclusively happened during 6 CE, which is 10 years after the death of King Herod. This is a blatant and major 10-year discrepancy. The final words of Christ are different in every account. The angels at the tomb are described differently in every account. The people who witnessed these angels are described differently in every account. And what these people did after witnessing these angels are described differently in every account. And the narrative of Jesus' whereabouts after his death is inconsistent. Historians also weigh claims against what is already known about the world. For example, a king collecting taxes is an ordinary claim, but a man rising from the dead is an extraordinary claim. So extraordinary claims generally require extraordinary evidence, for again which the resurrection has none. If someone came up to you and said, look, a man rose from the dead, it says so in my book, and there was no other human on earth that could provide evidence to support any of those claims within that book, would you believe that a man rose from the dead based off of that person's word alone? So believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ is only not insane because of how normalized it's been by the people who have killed him. So objectively, if you were to present the resurrection case to a jury, the jury would look at the non-existent evidence and be unable to conclude that a resurrection truly ever happened. After using the same historical criteria that scholars use to deduce the legitimacy of an extraordinary event, I find that there is evidence to suggest that early Christians truly believed that Jesus rose from the dead. However, I find no evidence whatsoever to suggest that a resurrection actually historically happened. This makes the resurrection a matter of faith and not truth. So you need to ask yourself, what is more important to you, faith or truth? Faith is belief without reason. Truth is something that Jesus said he was. So to follow Jesus, I believe you must follow truth. So that may mean neglecting that the resurrection may have happened and instead pursuing what is objectively true. Let me know what other religious claims that y'all would like me to look into and investigate. And listen to my album if you want to understand how religion truly works in America and how it's currently being exploited and all the other horrors in the Bible Belt that are actively going on. I highly suggest it. Thank you. Have a great day.